He lives in the penthouse, runs million-dollar companies, and acts like nothing in the world could ever throw his life off balance. She just moved into the building, and in less than 2 weeks, she's already done the impossible. Messed up her own apartment, the peace and quiet on the floor, and maybe the mind of the most arrogant, gorgeous, and dangerously irresistible neighbor she's ever met. The moving truck blocked the entrance of the Wyndham building for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 doormen, 1 building manager, and a very apologetic delivery crew watched as box after box came through the lobby. Most of them unlabeled, some of them leaking packing peanuts across the marble floor. Brooke Whitmore had arrived. She stood in the middle of apartment 14B with her shoes already off, her bare feet on the cool hardwood, surrounded by towers of cardboard that leaned at dangerous angles. Her father had bought the place outright. A gift, he called it. So 2-bedroom in one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential towers, because Robert Whitmore, founder and chairman of Whitmore National Bank, did not do things halfway. He wanted his daughter somewhere safe, somewhere that matched the name she carried. Brooke had tried to argue. The argument lasted about 4 minutes. She opened the first box. Throw pillows. 14 of them, in colors that had no business being in the same room together. By midnight, the apartment looked like a cheerful disaster. Mugs she'd already unpacked sat on the kitchen counter, the coffee table, and one on the bathroom sink for reasons she couldn't explain. A pair of sneakers had been kicked near the front door. A half-eaten bowl of cereal balanced on a moving box labeled important stuff in her own loopy handwriting. She padded barefoot to the window and looked out. The city stretched below her, sharp and glittering, all those lives stacked on top of each other. Somewhere up there above her ceiling was the penthouse. She hadn't met whoever lived there, hadn't met most of her neighbors, actually. The building had that kind of silence, the expensive kind where people nodded in elevators but never learned each other's names. She pressed her forehead against the glass. It was cold. It felt good. 2 weeks passed. She learned that the lobby smelled like cedar and money. She learned that the gym on the 3rd floor was empty at 6 in the morning, which suited her fine because she looked terrible when she exercised and preferred not to have witnesses. She learned that the walls were thick enough to block most sound. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. Most, not all. It started on a Friday night. A low thrum of bass that vibrated through her ceiling at 11:15. Then voices, male, confident, the kind of laughter that came with expensive liquor, and no concern for anyone else's sleep. She put a pillow over her head, pulled the comforter up, tried counting backward from 100. She made it to 61. By midnight, the music had only gotten louder, something with a heavy beat that pulsed through the floor like a second heartbeat. She sat up in bed, hair wild, patience gone. She didn't think about what she was wearing. That was the thing about Brooke. She never thought about those things until it was too late. The shorts were too short. The white top was loose and thin, and it rode up just enough to show a strip of skin across her stomach. She didn't notice. She was too busy being furious. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor took 8 seconds. She spent all 8 rehearsing what she'd say. Something firm, something mature, something that would make it clear she was not the kind of neighbor who could be ignored. She knocked with both fists. The door opened. She started talking before she looked up. "Listen, I don't know what kind of—" Then she looked up. He filled the doorway like he'd been built to fit it, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back. Broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of a half-open shirt, a glass of whiskey in one hand, held low and lazy, and a face that made her forget every single word she'd prepared. Jeremy Blackburn looked down at the woman standing in his doorway with bare feet and fire in her eyes, and something shifted behind his ribs. His gaze dropped, not subtle, not even a little, from her face to the strip of skin above her waistband, to the legs below those ridiculous shorts, and back up again. Slowly. She felt that look the way you feel a hand brush your arm in a crowd. Every nerve woke up at once. The party was still going behind him. Someone laughed. Ice clinked in a glass. None of it mattered. "You're loud," she said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. He leaned against the doorframe. "You're barefoot." That's not a response. It's an observation. He reached past the door and turned something. The music dropped to a murmur. His eyes never left hers. Better? She should have said thank you and left. That's what a reasonable person would have done. Instead, she stood there, caught in something she couldn't name, while the hallway hummed with a silence that felt louder than the bass had been. His mouth curved just one side, a slow, deliberate half-smile that carried more heat than any full grin she'd ever seen. "Good night, neighbor," he said. She turned and walked to the elevator on legs that didn't feel entirely trustworthy. She pressed the button, waited, did not look back. He watched her until the doors closed. Then Jeremy Blackburn stood in his doorway for a long moment, whiskey forgotten, while his guests carried on without him. He couldn't remember the last time a woman had shown up at his door to yell at him. He couldn't stop thinking about the strip of skin above her waistband. He went back inside. But the party somehow had lost its flavor. Jeremy Blackburn had not thought about a woman for more than 12 consecutive minutes in over a decade. He knew this about himself, the way he knew his net worth or his resting heart rate. It was simply data. Women were pleasant, temporary, interchangeable in the ways that mattered and irrelevant in the ways that didn't. One night, no callbacks, no exceptions. The few times he'd broken that rule, the woman had started leaving things at his apartment. A toothbrush, a jacket, an expectation. And expectation was the one thing he refused to carry for someone else. So when he found himself, at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, asking the building concierge which floor Ms. Whitmore lived on, he told himself it was just curiosity. The concierge said 14. Jeremy nodded like it didn't matter. By Monday, he knew she went to the gym at 6:30. He knew because he asked the front desk attendant, casually between sips of black coffee, what time the gym was usually empty. The attendant mentioned that a new resident had been coming in early. Petite woman, lots of energy. Jeremy filed this away as if it were a quarterly earnings report and not the schedule of a woman in short shorts who had rattled something loose in his chest. Tuesday morning he showed up at 6:25. He never used the building gym. He had a full setup in his penthouse, squat rack, cables, a rowing machine that cost more than most people's cars. But there he was, in a black shirt that fit too well, pretending to adjust the settings on a treadmill he had no intention of using. Brooke walked in with earbuds dangling around her neck and a water bottle that had a sticker of a cartoon avocado on it. Her hair was pulled up in a messy knot. She wore leggings and a tank top that had a small coffee stain near the hem. She saw him immediately. He saw her see him. Neither said a word about it. She got on the elliptical. He moved to the free weights. For 20 minutes they existed in the same room without speaking, and the air between them was so thick with awareness that Brooke nearly tripped stepping off the machine. He appeared in the elevator the next morning, and the morning after that, always dressed like he had somewhere important to be, even at dawn, always positioning himself just close enough that she could smell his cologne, something warm and woody that lingered in the small space long after the doors opened. "You're everywhere," she said on the third morning, staring at the elevator numbers as they climbed. "I live here. You live on the top floor. There's no reason for you to be on 14. He looked at her sideways. Those eyes, pale grey and sharp, held something that felt like a dare. "Maybe I like the view from 14. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. "The view from 14 is a hallway." "Exactly." She left the elevator before he could see the heat crawling up her neck. But she felt his gaze on her back all the way to her door, warm and steady as a hand pressed between her shoulders. By Friday, the pattern was set. He found her in the lobby, in the gym, by the mailboxes. Always with something brief to say. A comment about her sneakers, a question about the noise level, a remark delivered with the kind of dry humor that made her laugh before she could stop herself. Each conversation lasted only a few minutes, but they left a residue. She'd find herself replaying his words while she brushed her teeth. He'd catch himself checking the time at 6:15 and reaching for gym clothes he didn't need. Then came the evening in the lobby. She was coming in from the rain, umbrella broken, jacket soaked, hair dripping into her eyes. He was standing by the front desk in a charcoal suit, talking to someone on the phone. He ended the call mid-sentence when he saw her. "You look like you lost a fight with a garden hose." "Thanks, very helpful." She shook the umbrella, which promptly collapsed further. She swore under her breath. He took the umbrella from her hand examined it, and dropped it in the nearest trash can. "It's dead." "Let it go." "That was a perfectly good—" "It was not." She wiped the rain off her forehead with the back of her hand and looked up at him. Water clung to her eyelashes, her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and Jeremy Blackburn, who had closed deals worth hundreds of millions without a single change in his heartbeat, felt his mouth go dry. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, close enough that the rain on her jacket almost touched his suit, and he didn't step back. "Have dinner with me," he said. But it wasn't a question. It was a statement wrapped in silk. "Why?" He tilted his head. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you in that white top since Friday night, and I'd like one evening to get it out of my system." There it was. No disguise, no games. One evening. One night. The same offer he'd made 100 times to 100 different women, and every single one of them had said yes. Brooke looked at him, at the sharp jaw, the controlled confidence, the mouth that promised things she didn't want to think about in a public lobby, and she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, loud, the kind that echoed off marble. "I'm not your type," she said, still grinning. His eyes narrowed, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "You're exactly my type. Then you'll need more than a dinner invitation." She picked an invisible piece of lint off his lapel, patted his chest once, felt the warmth of him, the solid wall of muscle beneath the fabric, and walked past him toward the elevator. He stood in the lobby, hand still at his side where her fingers had touched him, and realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had said no. He also realized, with a discomfort that annoyed him deeply, that he wanted to hear her say it again. Brooke's brother called on a Sunday morning, the way he always did, without warning, and without considering whether she might still be asleep. "You sound like you just woke up," Ethan said, "because I just woke up." She pulled the pillow over her face and spoke through it. "It's 9 in the morning on a Sunday." "It's almost 10. Get up. I'm coming over." He didn't ask. Ethan never asked. He was 5 years older, a corporate lawyer with the posture of someone who'd never once been told he was wrong, and he loved his sister in the aggressive, suffocating way that only oldest brothers could manage. He'd been against the apartment from the start, not the building but the independence it represented. Brooke on her own, in the city, without supervision. The thought made him itch. By the time he arrived, she'd managed to make coffee and shove most of the mess into her bedroom. He stood in her living room and looked around with the expression of a man surveying damage after a storm. "There are 6 mugs on this table." "I know." "Why are there 6 mugs?" "Because I haven't carried them to the kitchen yet." She handed him a coffee. "Sit down. Relax. It won't hurt, I promise." He sat on the couch and moved a throw pillow, bright orange, shaped like a sun, to make room. He held it up with 2 fingers. "Where did you even find this?" "A street market in Brooklyn. Isn't it great?" He set it down carefully, the way someone handles something they suspect might be contagious. "So, how's the building?" She shrugged and tucked her feet under her on the armchair. "Fine, quiet. The gym's nice." "Met anyone?" She took a sip of coffee. The image of grey eyes and a half-open shirt flashed through her mind and disappeared just as fast. "A few neighbors. Nothing interesting." Ethan studied her. He had that gift, the ability to detect a lie the way some people detect a change in the weather, a slight shift in pressure, and he'd know. "You're doing that thing where you look at your mug instead of at me." "I'm drinking coffee, Ethan." "That requires looking at the mug." He let it go, but he didn't stop watching. They talked about their father, the new branch opening in Boston, the fundraiser next month. They talked about her job search, which she kept insisting was going well and he kept insisting was going nowhere. And then, somewhere between the second coffee and a stretch of silence, Ethan said the thing that planted itself under her skin like a splinter. "You know what your problem is?" She looked at him. "I wasn't aware I had one." "You're too much." He said it casually, the way he said everything, like it was a fact, not an opinion. "You're loud, you're messy, you're all over the place. Men like someone they can take seriously, someone steady." "I am steady." "You have a pillow shaped like a sun, Brooke. That has nothing to do with— No serious man is going to fall for someone like you." He wasn't being cruel. That was the worst part. He genuinely believed he was helping. Not the kind of man who matters. You're fun, sure, but fun doesn't last. You need someone who'll stick around, and the kind of men who stick around want someone... Someone what? Her voice had gone quiet. Boring? Predictable? Grounded. The word landed like a slap, dressed up as advice. She didn't argue, didn't fire back with the kind of sharp comeback that usually lived on the tip of her tongue. She just looked at her coffee and felt something shrink inside her chest. Ethan left an hour later, satisfied that he'd been helpful. At the door, he kissed her forehead and told her to clean up the mugs. She closed the door, pressed her back against it, and stood there breathing for a long time. The apartment was too quiet. She thought about the penthouse, about the man who lived there, controlled precise, the kind of man who alphabetized his bookshelf and never left a dish in the sink. A man who treated women like items on a checklist. One night, no repeats. Sa's man who would never, in any version of reality, fall in love with a woman like her, and that's when the idea took root. She called Ethan that evening. He picked up on the first ring, because Ethan always picked up on the first ring when it was her. Bet, she said. What? 3 months. I'll prove you wrong. He laughed. Prove me wrong how? A man. A serious one. Not just interested. Actually falling for me. The real thing. 3 months. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What kind of man? She thought of grey eyes, cold composure, a jaw that looked carved from stone. The kind you just said wouldn't exist. He laughed again, but there was something else in it now. Something like doubt. Fine. 3 months. But he has to care about you. Not just your body, not just dinner. Really care. Deal. She hung up and sat on her kitchen counter with her feet dangling, staring at the ceiling. The penthouse was right above her. She could almost hear the silence up there, perfect, organized, untouched by chaos. Her strategy was simple. She knew what Jeremy Blackburn wanted. He'd told her plainly, 1 night, 1 chance, then gone. If she gave him that, she'd be erased by morning. He'd add her to whatever mental list he kept and move on without looking back, so she wouldn't give him that. She'd give him everything else. The conversation, the laughter, the presence he didn't know he wanted. She'd walk right up to the edge and stop. She'd make him stay for reasons he couldn't explain and didn't know how to name. It was reckless, she knew that. But Brooke Whitmore had never once chosen the safe option when the reckless one felt more honest. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday, in the form of a text message with no greeting and no pleasantries. Dinner, my place, Friday. 8 o'clock. Brooke stared at the screen while standing in her kitchen, a wooden spoon in one hand and something that was supposed to be pasta sauce bubbling on the stove behind her. She read it twice, then a third time, then she typed back, Is this a mass text or am I special? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Just you. She set the phone down and stirred the sauce, which had turned a shade of orange that no tomato-based recipe should ever achieve. Her heart was doing something it had no right to do over 3 words on a screen. Just you. She told herself it meant nothing. He probably said that to every woman. It was a line, a move, a play from a book he'd memorized years ago. She told herself that, and then she spent the next 2 days choosing what to wear. Friday evening she rode the elevator to the penthouse floor with damp palms and a green silk top that showed her collarbones. She'd left her hair down, dark waves that brushed her shoulders, and put on exactly enough perfume to be noticed without trying. The hallway smelled like fresh linen and something expensive she couldn't name. She knocked once. He opened the door in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No tie, no suit jacket. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him, and somehow it made him look more dangerous, not less. The veins on his forearms stood out. She noticed and hated herself for noticing. You came, he said. You asked. He stepped aside. The penthouse opened before her like a magazine spread. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline burning gold and violet beyond the glass, polished concrete floors, furniture in shades of charcoal and cream, everything aligned, everything intentional. It smelled like rosemary, and seared meat and his cologne, all layered together in a way that made her want to close her eyes and breathe deeper. Not a single throw pillow in sight. The kitchen island was set for two, actual cloth napkins, wine glasses that caught the light like crystal bells. He'd cooked. She could see the evidence on the counter, though he'd already cleaned most of it away because of course he had. "You cook," she said, sliding onto a bar stool, "when I want something done right." He poured wine without asking what she preferred. Red, dark as garnet. It smelled like black cherries and oak. "So you don't trust restaurants?" "I don't trust anyone else's timing on a steak," she laughed. The sound bounced off the high ceilings and settled between them. He glanced at her, a quick look, there and gone, and something in his jaw softened for half a second before snapping back into place. Dinner was better than it had any right to be. Seared lamb with a herb crust, roasted potatoes with crisp edges that shattered when she bit into them, greens tossed in something tangy that she couldn't identify. She made a sound on the first bite, involuntary, almost embarrassing, and he paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, watching her with an expression that was harder to read than anything he'd said out loud. They talked, not about the building or the noise or the elevator, about real things. She told him about her father's expectation that she'd join the family bank, and how she'd spent 3 years studying art history instead, just to feel like the choice was hers. He told her, carefully in measured pieces, about starting his company at 22 with borrowed money and a stubbornness that bordered on pathological. "My father thought I was wasting time," he said. "He wanted me in finance, safe, predictable. And you wanted?" He looked at her. "Everything." She held his gaze. "Did you get it?" The pause lasted 1 beat too long. Most of it. She didn't ask what was missing. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer, because a part of her, a small, reckless, hopeful part, already suspected it had something to do with the way he kept looking at her mouth when he thought she wasn't paying attention. After dinner, they moved to the living room. The couch was enormous and absurdly comfortable, the kind of leather that sighed when you sat down. She tucked her legs beneath her and held the wine glass against her chest. The city glittered through the windows, silent from this height, like a secret being kept for just the two of them. "This is your move, right?" she said, swirling the wine. "Cook dinner, pour wine, impressive view." He sat at the other end of the couch, one arm along the back, completely at ease. "Is it working?" The lamb was incredible. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him over the rim of her glass. "I know." Silence. He didn't push. That was the thing that unsettled her most. She'd expected pressure, a hand on her knee, a leaning in, the practiced choreography of a man who always got what he wanted. Instead, he just sat there, present, patient, like he had all the time in the world and no intention of rushing anything. It scared her more than any move would have. She left at midnight. He walked her to the door. In the hallway, under the soft overhead light, he stood close enough that she could see a thin scar near his left eyebrow she hadn't noticed before. She almost asked about it. "Good night, Brooke." The way he said her name, low, unhurried, like he was tasting it, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Good night, Jeremy." She turned and walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited, stepped inside. The doors closed. He stood in the hallway for 15 seconds after she was gone. Then he went back inside, looked at the second wine glass still on his coffee table, the faint print of her lipstick on the rim, and did not wash it. He stood in his immaculate kitchen and realized he had no idea what had just happened to him. The wine showed up on a Thursday night at 9:15. No warning, no text. Just a knock on her door, and Jeremy Blackburn standing in the hallway holding a bottle that probably cost more than her entire kitchen. Brooke opened the door in an oversized sweater and pajama shorts, her hair twisted into a clip that was losing the battle against gravity. A smudge of chocolate was on her thumb from the ice cream she'd been eating straight from the container. He looked at her, then at the chocolate, then back at her face. "Bad time?" he said. "Terrible time." She stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into her apartment and stopped. She watched his eyes move across the room, the pillows piled on the couch in no particular arrangement, The 3 mugs on the coffee table, the blanket half on the floor, the stack of books leaning like a tower about to fall. His penthouse could have been in an architecture magazine. Her apartment looked like a yard sale had gotten comfortable and decided to stay. Something flickered across his face. Not judgment. Something closer to fascination. "How do you find anything in here?" "I don't." She took the wine from his hand and walked to the kitchen. "That's part of the adventure." He followed her, hands in his pockets, looking at everything. A framed photo on the bookshelf. Brooke with her arms around an older man who shared her eyes. Her father, he guessed. A small ceramic cat on the windowsill with a chipped ear. Sticky notes on the fridge with reminders written in handwriting so messy it looked like a different language. She handed him a glass. Not a wine glass. A regular glass. Because she couldn't find the wine glasses and wasn't about to admit that. He looked at it. "Problem?" she said. "Not at all." He took a sip without breaking eye contact. Something about the way he drank wine from a juice glass, in her chaotic kitchen with complete composure, it made her stomach flip. They ended up on her couch. She sat cross-legged on one end, he sat on the other, and the space between them felt like a living thing. She asked about his week. He told her about a deal that had nearly collapsed over a conference call, and the way he described the negotiation, dry, precise, with a timing that made the whole thing sound like a comedy sketch, had her laughing so hard she almost spilled her wine. "You're funny," she said, surprised. "Don't sound so shocked. I didn't think billionaires were allowed to be funny." "We're not, I'll be fined." She grinned. He watched her grin the way someone watches a match being struck. Brief, bright, impossible to look away from. That was the night the messages started. She texted him at 11:40, 20 minutes after he'd left. A photo of her kitchen counter with a red wine ring on the marble and the caption, "Evidence of a crime scene." He replied in 14 seconds. "That counter was clean when I arrived." "Exactly, you brought the weapon." "The weapon was a $200 Bordeaux. And you served it in a juice glass. You're complicit." He was lying in bed, phone in hand, smiling at the ceiling. He didn't smile at ceilings. He didn't text women after midnight. He had rules about this. Firm, tested, proven rules that had kept his life clean and uncomplicated for years. He typed back anyway. The messages became a nightly thing. First provocations, sharp, flirtatious, the verbal equivalent of circling each other. Then gradually, without either of them noticing the shift, they became something else. She sent him voice messages, laughing through stories about her day, narrating her cooking disasters with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator. He listened to every one, sometimes twice. Her laugh in his ear at 1 in the morning became a sound he looked forward to with an intensity that disturbed him. One night she convinced him to come downstairs for a movie. "It's a documentary," she said. "About what?" "Important things. You'll like it." He arrived at her door at 9, and within 10 minutes he was sitting on her couch, surrounded by a fortress of throw pillows, watching the opening credits of a romantic comedy from 2003 with a woman in a pink dress running through an airport on the screen. He turned to look at her. She was already grinning. Surprise. "This is not a documentary. It's a documentary about love. That's not what documentary means." "Shh, it's starting." He stayed. He didn't know why. The movie was absurd, predictable plot, improbable coincidences, a soundtrack that tried too hard. But she laughed at every joke, gasped at every twist she clearly already knew was coming, and whispered commentary that was funnier than the film itself. Halfway through, her head drifted, first to the back of the couch, then to his shoulder. He went still. Her breathing slowed. Her body softened against him. The weight of her, slight, warm, trusting, pressed into his arm like she'd always belonged there. The scent of her shampoo reached him. Something floral. Coconut, maybe. It mixed with the fading wine on her breath and the laundry soap smell of her sweater. He didn't move. The movie played on. Credits eventually rolled. The screen went dark, and still he sat there, his shoulder going numb, his arm aching, his entire body locked in place because she was asleep on him, and the thought of waking her felt like a thing he couldn't do. 40 minutes. He sat perfectly still for 40 minutes. When she finally stirred and mumbled an apology, he said it was fine. Said the movie wasn't bad. Said good night. He walked to the elevator. The doors opened. He stepped inside. But he didn't press the button. Not right away. He stood in that elevator alone with her warmth still ghosting his shoulder and tried to understand what was happening to him. He couldn't. The feeling didn't have edges. It didn't fit into a category. It just sat there in his chest like something swallowed whole. He pressed the button for the penthouse and leaned against the wall. The elevator carried him up in silence, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. Rain hammered the gym windows at 6:30 in the morning, turning the city into a blur of grey and silver. Brooke was on the mat, struggling with a dumbbell that was probably too heavy for her, but that she refused to swap out because she'd already told herself she could handle it. Her left elbow was drifting outward. Her back was arching in a way that would cost her later. She didn't hear him come in. "You're going to hurt yourself." His voice came from behind her, anti-close, low, the kind of voice that vibrated in the space between her shoulder blades. She nearly dropped the weight. "I'm fine. Your form says otherwise." Before she could argue, he was there, right behind her. His hand found her elbow and guided it inward, his fingers firm and warm against her skin. His other hand pressed flat against the small of her back, correcting her posture, straightening her spine. She felt the heat of his palm through her tank top like a brand. "There," he said, "keep it like that." She kept it like that. She also stopped breathing for about 5 seconds, but that felt like a minor detail compared to the fact that his hand was still on her back and he hadn't moved it. He lingered. She felt his thumb shift, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement against the fabric of her shirt. Not a correction, just a touch that didn't want to end. Then he stepped away. "Better," he said, and walked to the bench press as though nothing had happened. Brooke finished her set with a pulse hammering in her ears that had nothing to do with the exercise. She wiped her forehead with her wrist and glanced at him across the gym. He was focused on his own workout, jaw tight, arms moving with that controlled mechanical precision that made everything he did look effortless. But his eyes, just once, slid toward her in the mirror. She caught it. He knew she caught it. Neither said a word. Days blurred. She lost count of how many evenings she spent in his penthouse, how many bottles of wine they'd shared on his enormous couch while the city sparkled below. It had become routine without either of them naming it. She'd text, "coming up," and he'd leave the door unlocked. She'd arrive barefoot, sometimes carrying snacks from her kitchen, crackers with cheese sliced at uneven angles, grapes spilling from a bowl. He'd look at her offerings the way a surgeon might look at a crayon drawing of an operation, and she'd throw a grape at his head. One night, the conversation ran deeper than usual. She'd told him about her mother, gone since Brooke was 12, a car accident on a rainy highway in November. She didn't cry when she talked about it. Her voice just got quieter, like the volume dial on something too large to fully express. He listened without interrupting. Didn't offer comfort in words because he wasn't built for that. Instead, he refilled her glass, pulled a blanket from the back of the couch, and put it over her legs without asking. Small things. The kind of things that said more than a speech ever could. "Your turn," she said. "My turn for what?" "Something real. I just gave you something real." He held his glass with both hands and looked at the skyline. "I haven't spoken to my father in 6 years." She waited. "He told me the company would fail. When I proved him wrong, he didn't congratulate me. He asked for money." A beat. "I sent the check and stopped taking his calls." Brooke looked at him, at the way his shoulders carried the weight of that sentence without flinching, and understood something new. The control wasn't armor, it was scar tissue. He'd built walls not because he didn't feel, but because feeling had never gotten him anything but disappointment. She reached over and placed her hand on his forearm. Just that, her fingers on his skin. He looked at her hand, then at her. The room shrank. His face moved toward hers. Slow, deliberate, the way a person leans in when they've stopped deciding and started following. She saw it happen. His eyes dropped to her lips. The air between them thinned to nothing. She could feel the warmth radiating off his skin, could smell the wine on his breath mixed with his cologne. Her eyes closed. His phone rang. The sound cut through the room like glass breaking. He pulled back, reached into his pocket, looked at the screen with an expression that could have frozen the Hudson. He answered, "Something about a contract." His voice shifted into that flat, professional register she barely recognized. She sat there, heart slamming against her ribs, the ghost of his breath still on her face. She left while he was still on the call, didn't say goodbye, just touched his shoulder as she passed, and he caught her wrist, briefly without looking up, just long enough for his thumb to press once against her pulse point before letting go. She was shaking in the elevator, pressed her back against the cold metal wall and breathed. 2 days later, it happened again. She was in his kitchen, standing in front of the coffee machine that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. Chrome and matte black with buttons labeled in abbreviations she didn't understand, and a steam wand that hissed when she touched the wrong lever. "How does anyone make coffee with this thing?" He appeared behind her. "Like this." He reached around both sides of her body, his chest pressing lightly against her back. His hands covered hers on the machine, guiding, adjusting, turning the dial. The warmth of him surrounded her completely. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder blade. Slow, steady, controlled. Hers was none of those things. He turned the knob and the machine hummed to life. But neither of them moved. His breath stirred the hair near her temple. She turned her head slowly, and his face was right there, inches away, jaw tight, eyes dark with something that had nothing to do with coffee. 1 centimeter, maybe less. She could feel the pull of him like gravity. Inevitable, terrifying, wonderful. "So," she whispered, "does it also make tea?" He blinked. She ducked under his arm, grabbed the cup, and took 3 steps back with a smile that wobbled at the edges. A joke, a shield, because if she'd stayed 1 second longer, she would have kissed him, and everything she was trying to build would have crumbled before it had a chance to become real. He leaned against the counter and looked at her. His jaw worked once, twice. Then he laughed, a short, low sound that came from somewhere deep, and shook his head. "You're impossible," he said. "So I've been told." She sipped the coffee. It was perfect, but her hands were trembling so hard that she held the cup with both palms and prayed he couldn't see. He could. He saw everything. That was the problem. Marcus Cole noticed things. It was what made him a good business partner and an inconvenient friend. He'd built a career reading boardrooms, the slight lean of a CEO about to bluff, the tap of a pen that meant the deal was dead before anyone said so. He read people the way other people read menus, quickly, accurately, and without much sympathy for what wasn't on the page. So when Jeremy Blackburn checked his phone for the 3rd time during a Tuesday morning meeting, Marcus didn't miss it. He didn't say anything, not then. He waited until the conference room emptied, and the two of them were alone with cold coffee and a stack of contracts. "Who is she?" Jeremy looked up from his phone. "What?" "The woman you keep texting. And don't say it's your accountant, because your accountant doesn't make you smile like that." Jeremy's face went flat, the practiced mask, stone jaw, empty eyes, the expression of a man who had never once been caught off guard. "I'm not smiling. You were 3 seconds ago. You're seeing things." Marcus leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He was built leaner than Jeremy, with sharp features, and the kind of confidence that came from being right about things more often than not. They'd been partners since the early days, the borrowed money days, the ramen and energy drink days, and Marcus had earned the right to say things that no one else could. "I've known you for 12 years, Marcus said. "You've never repeated a woman, never. And I've been watching you answer texts from the same person for 3 weeks now. It's nothing. Nothing doesn't keep you up past midnight. I saw the timestamps on those messages you forwarded me last week by accident. 2:14 in the morning, Jeremy." Jeremy set his phone face down on the table, deliberately, like putting a weapon away. "She's a neighbor." Marcus raised one eyebrow. "A neighbor. In the building. And you're texting this neighbor until 2 in the morning because you need to discuss the homeowners association." Jeremy exhaled through his nose. "Drop it. I'll drop it when you stop lying to yourself." Marcus stood and gathered his jacket. At the door, he turned back. "Whatever this is, it's different. I can see it. The question is whether you're going to figure that out before you mess it up. The door closed behind him. Jeremy sat in the empty conference room for a long time, staring at the phone he'd turned face down, and didn't pick it up. He picked it up 11 minutes later. Across town, or rather 14 floors below, Brooke was lying face up on a yoga mat in the building gym, while Nina Torres stretched her hamstring with the professional detachment of someone who did this 8 hours a day. Nina had been a personal trainer at the Wyndham building for 4 years. Short, muscular, with dark curly hair she kept in a bun so tight it could probably withstand a hurricane. She had a laugh that travelled through walls and an opinion about everything, which she delivered without being asked and without apology. She'd become Brooke's closest friend within 72 hours of Brooke moving in, mainly because Brooke had shown up to her first session with sneakers that didn't match, and Nina had said, "I already love you." "You're glowing," Nina said, pushing Brooke's knee toward her chest. "I'm sweating." "Different glow. Sweat glow goes away. This one's been here for a week." Brooke closed her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. Penthouse." One word. Brooke's eyes flew open. Nina grinned. "Honey, you take the elevator upstairs 3 times a week and come back looking like you swallowed a secret. The doorman told me, the morning concierge told me. I'm pretty sure the security camera knows. I'm going to kill every employee in this building. Too late. Spill." Brooke sat up and hugged her knees. The gym was empty. Early morning light filtered through the rain-streaked windows, casting long pale stripes across the floor. She could hear the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic far below. "It's not what you think." "Okay, what is it?" Brooke picked at the edge of her yoga mat. "He's different than I expected. I went up there thinking I had a plan. Be interesting, be fun, keep him at arm's length. Make him want more than just—" She gestured vaguely. "You know." Nina nodded. She knew. "But then he cooks for me. And he listens. Not the fake kind, the kind where he remembers what I said 3 conversations ago and brings it up like it matters. He texts me at midnight and doesn't try anything. He sat through a romantic comedy, Nina, a terrible one, and he didn't move for 40 minutes because I fell asleep on his shoulder." Nina's face softened. "Oh no." "What? You like him?" That was always the, "No, you like him." For real. This isn't the bet anymore. Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the floor. Nina sat down beside her on the mat and bumped her shoulder. "Brooke." I don't know when it changed. Her voice was small now, stripped of its usual brightness, like a lamp dimmed to its lowest setting. "I went in with a strategy. I had rules. Stay smart, stay in control. And then he corrected my form on the bench press, and his hand was on my back and I forgot every single rule I've ever had." Nina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does he know about the bet?" "No." "Are you going to tell him?" Brooke pulled at a loose thread on her leggings. "There's nothing to tell. The bet doesn't mean anything anymore. It stopped meaning something the night he told me about his father. But it existed. And if he finds out, he won't." Nina looked at her with the expression of a woman who had watched enough people lie to themselves to recognize the sound of it. She didn't push. She just put her arm around Brooke's shoulder and squeezed. "Be careful," she said. "Not with him. With yourself." Brooke leaned into her friend's warmth and said nothing. Outside the windows the rain had stopped, and the city was beginning to gleam with that particular light that comes only after a storm, sharp, clean, almost too bright to look at directly. It reminded her of his eyes when he was about to say something honest. She thought about what Nina said. Be careful with yourself. She thought about the coffee machine and his breath on her temple. She thought about how his voice sounded at 2 in the morning through a phone speaker. Lower, rougher, like a version of himself he didn't show anyone else. She was already past careful. She knew it the way you know a bruise is forming before the color shows. You can't see it yet, but you feel the tenderness every time something presses against it. The question wasn't whether she'd fallen. The question was what would happen when he realized it. The dress was black. Simple. A neckline that dipped just low enough to suggest without revealing, and a hemline that stopped above the knee. She'd found it at the back of her closet, bought months ago on impulse and never worn because there'd been no occasion that felt worthy of it. She put it on, looked in the mirror and almost changed 3 times before Nina's voice in her head said, "Stop fidgeting and go." Jeremy had invited her to a corporate event. A gala technically, though he'd called it a dinner with people I tolerate. He'd said he needed a companion. The way he said it, flat, practical, like he was requesting a +1 for a dentist appointment, should have bothered her. It didn't, because she'd heard the pause before he asked. The tiny breath that betrayed the fact that Jeremy Blackburn, a man who had never needed anything from anyone, was nervous. He was waiting in the lobby. Dark suit, tailored so precisely it looked painted on, hair pushed back, clean-shaven, which was unusual. She'd grown used to the shadow of stubble along his jaw, and its absence made him look younger, almost vulnerable. She stepped out of the elevator, and he turned. He didn't say anything for a full 3 seconds. His eyes moved from her face to the curve of her shoulders, to the way the fabric skimmed her waist, and he pressed his lips together like he was physically holding words inside his mouth. "You look—" He stopped, cleared his throat, started again. "You're ready?" She smiled. "That's not what you were going to say." "It's what I'm choosing to say." Coward. Something sparked in his eyes, half challenge, half surrender. He offered his arm. She took it. His skin was warm beneath the sleeve. She could feel the muscle underneath, taut and steady, and she held on a little tighter than necessary. The gala was held in a glass-walled venue on the 62nd floor of a building downtown. White tablecloths, champagne towers, a string quartet playing something classical that floated above the conversation, like background noise for people who were too important to listen. The room was full of suits and silk, investors, executives, names that appeared in financial papers she'd never read. Jeremy moved through the crowd the way he moved through everything, with certainty. He shook hands, nodded at introductions, responded to questions with the same controlled ease that made him lethal in a boardroom. But he kept her close. His hand found the small of her back and stayed there, warm and constant, guiding her through conversations like she belonged beside him. And then the introduction started. "This is Brooke Whitmore," he said to a silver-haired man with a firm handshake. No qualifier, no my neighbor, no a friend. Just her name offered with a naturalness that surprised even him. She noticed. He noticed that she noticed. The silver-haired man smiled. "Lovely to meet you. How long have you two been—" "We're just—" Jeremy began. "A while," Brooke said smoothly, squeezing his arm with a grin that dared him to correct her. He didn't. They were seated at a round table with 3 other couples and a man named Gerald, who talked about real estate development for 45 uninterrupted minutes. Under the table, Brooke tapped Jeremy's knee twice. He glanced at her. She widened her eyes slightly, the universal expression for "save me," and he covered her hand with his beneath the tablecloth and leaned toward Gerald. "Fascinating," he said, in a tone that meant the opposite. "Could you excuse us?" He pulled her chair back and guided her to the balcony, where the noise dulled and the city opened up below them in rivers of light. "You just rescued me from a man named Gerald," she said, leaning against the railing. "Gerald has been talking about that building in Midtown since 2019. No one has the courage to stop him, except you." "I have very selective courage." She laughed. That full laugh, the one that made heads turn, the one that sounded like it was too big for her body. He watched her, and the look on his face was something new. Not desire, though, that was there. Not amusement, though that was there too. Something quieter. Something that looked like a man standing at the edge of water and realizing it was deeper than he thought. They stayed on the balcony for 20 minutes, while the gala carried on without them. She told him about a painting she'd seen in a gallery that week, a woman standing alone in a field of sunflowers, her face turned away from the viewer. He asked why she liked it. She said because the woman wasn't performing for anyone. She was just existing. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was different, softer at the edges. "I think that's the first time anyone's told me something beautiful at one of these events." She looked at him. The city lights caught the angles of his face and turned them silver. His eyes were steady on hers, and for one long moment, everything else, the music, the noise, the 100 people inside, simply stopped mattering. "We should go back in," she said. Not because she wanted to, because she didn't trust herself not to close the distance between them. if they stayed out there another minute. He nodded, but his hand lingered on her back as they walked inside, and his thumb brushed once across the fabric of her dress. A movement so small she might have imagined it. She didn't imagine it. The rest of the night passed in a blur of champagne and conversation. He introduced her to everyone. She charmed the investors, made the wives laugh, and held her own with the kind of quiet confidence that came not from wealth or status, but from simply being comfortable in her own skin. Jeremy watched her across the table, across the room, across every conversation he was supposed to be paying attention to, and didn't. He didn't try anything that night. That was the part that undid her. When they got back to the building, he walked her to her door. The hallway was quiet. The overhead light cast a warm glow that softened everything. She turned to face him, her back against the door, and looked up. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight." He was close. Close enough that she could see the faint line of a vein at his temple and the way his jaw tightened as he looked at her. He raised one hand and, slowly, as if giving her time to step away, brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingertips grazed her cheekbone. Her breath caught. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to her cheek. Not a quick peck, a slow, deliberate kiss that lingered against her skin, warm and unhurried, his breath ghosting toward her ear. 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough that her fingers curled against the door behind her, and her eyes closed without permission. He pulled back. His voice was low and rough, like something dragged across gravel. "Good night, Brooke." He turned and walked to the elevator. She watched him go. The doors opened. He stepped in without looking back. She went inside, closed the door, pressed her back against it, and stood there with her hand on her cheek where his lips had been. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She smiled, not a grin, not a laugh. A smile that came from somewhere deep and private, the kind that shows up only when something shifts inside you, and you know, with total certainty, that you are no longer in control of what happens next. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Brooke understood that the bet was gone. It had evaporated without ceremony, without a moment she could point to and say there. That's when it stopped being a game. It just had. And the man 14 floors above her, lying in his own bed in his perfect, silent apartment, was staring at his own ceiling and thinking about the way her eyes had looked on that balcony. Open, honest, completely unguarded. He turned onto his side and closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come for a long time. 3 days passed. 3 days of texts that said nothing important and meant everything. 3 days of Brooke standing at her kitchen window, looking up at the ceiling as if she could see through it. 3 days of Jeremy sitting in meetings without hearing a single word, because his mind kept returning to the feel of her cheekbone under his fingertips. On the 4th evening, Brooke opened a bottle of wine. A good one. Not the $200 kind he brought, but decent. She put on jeans and a soft sweater, left her hair down, and looked at herself in the mirror. "This is just wine," she said out loud. "Just a neighbor bringing wine." She didn't believe herself. She took the elevator up. Each floor ticked by like a heartbeat. When she knocked, she arranged her face into something casual. Something that said I was in the neighborhood, even though the neighborhood was 1 floor away. He opened the door without surprise, like he'd been waiting. Like he'd been standing near that door for hours without admitting why. "I brought wine," she said, holding up the bottle with a smile she hoped looked effortless. He stepped aside. "I see that." The penthouse was dim. He hadn't turned on the main lights, just the kitchen island pendant, and the glow from the city through the windows. It made the apartment feel smaller, warmer, like a room that had been stripped of its formality and left with only the essentials. He opened the wine. She leaned against the counter and watched his hands, sure, precise, the way they did everything. The cork came out with a soft pop. He poured 2 glasses and slid one across the marble toward her. Their fingers didn't touch, but the distance between them was the kind that felt louder than contact. They talked about his week, about a gallery she wanted to visit, about the doorman who always called her Miss Whitfield instead of Whitmore, and how she didn't have the heart to correct him anymore. He laughed at that, a real laugh, The kind that changed his whole face, loosened his jaw, made the lines around his eyes deepen into something almost boyish. The first glass went slowly, the second one faster. The conversation got closer to the bone. She told him she'd been afraid of elevators as a child. He told her he still couldn't sleep with a door open. Small confessions, traded like cards, each one lowering the wall between them by another inch. Somewhere between the second glass and a joke she made about his obsession with perfect kitchen counters, the air shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was like the temperature in a room rising so gradually you don't notice until your skin is flushed and your breathing has changed. He stopped talking. His glass was on the counter. His eyes were on her, but different now. No humor, no defense, no calculation. Just him, stripped down to something raw, looking at her like she was the only clear thing in a life full of noise. She held his gaze. Her heart was beating in her throat. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps. His hands found her waist, both of them firm, certain, and he pulled her toward him. The kiss was not gentle. It was the collapse of weeks of restraint. Every almost touch, every interrupted moment, every night spent staring at ceilings. His mouth met hers with an urgency that stole the air from her lungs. She tasted wine and warmth and something distinctly him. Her hands found his chest, then his neck, then the back of his head, fingers threading through his hair. He groaned against her lips, a low, rough sound that vibrated through her entire body. He lifted her, effortlessly, like she weighed nothing, set her on the edge of the marble counter without breaking the kiss. His hands gripped her waist, thumbs pressing into the soft skin above her hips. Her legs wrapped around him instinctively, pulling him closer, and the contact of his body against hers sent a shockwave from her chest to her fingertips. He pulled back just enough to look at her, breathing hard, eyes dark. She was trembling, not from cold. His forehead pressed against hers. His thumb traced her jawline, slow, reverent, like he was memorizing the shape of her. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She answered by pulling his mouth back to hers. The wine sat forgotten on the counter. The city burned through the windows, all gold and white and indifferent to what was unfolding in that kitchen. He kissed her neck, just below her ear, where the skin was thin and sensitive, and she arched into him with a sound she didn't recognize as her own. His lips trailed down her throat, slow and deliberate, each kiss landing like a promise. He carried her from the kitchen, down the hallway, into the bedroom she'd never seen, wide and dark with sheets the color of slate and a view of the skyline that stretched endlessly. He set her down at the edge of the bed and looked at her, really looked, not with hunger, though that was there, with something deeper, something that made her eyes sting. "You're sure?" he said. She touched his face, traced the scar near his eyebrow with her thumb. "I'm sure." What followed was not rushed. He undressed her slowly with a tenderness that contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. His hands moved with care, every touch deliberate, every kiss placed like it mattered. He whispered her name against her skin, and each time it sounded different, more honest, more his. She discovered things about him that no boardroom, no contract, no headline would ever reveal. The way his breath shook when she touched his shoulders. The way he closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against hers when the feeling got too big for his body to contain. The way he held her afterward, not loosely, not politely, but like a man holding something he was terrified to lose. They lay tangled in his sheets while the city hummed far below. Her head rested on his chest and she could hear his heartbeat, finally unsteady, finally out of rhythm. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The silence said everything that words would have fumbled. Sunlight found her first, a thin strip of gold that crept through the gap in the curtains and landed across her bare shoulder. Brooke stirred, blinked, and for 3 disoriented seconds didn't know where she was. The sheets were too smooth. The pillow smelled wrong in a way that was actually right, like cedar and clean skin and something spiced she couldn't name. Then she remembered. She turned her head slowly. Jeremy was awake, lying on his side, one arm folded under his pillow, watching her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. No composure, no mask. He looked like a man who'd been staring at something he didn't understand, and had decided quietly to stop trying. "Hi," she said. Her voice was rough with sleep. "Hi." She pulled the sheet up to her collarbone, suddenly aware of her own skin beneath it. "How long have you been awake?" "A while." "Were you watching me sleep?" "Yes." No deflection. No joke, just the truth, offered without packaging. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and buried half her face in the pillow. "That's either very romantic or very alarming." The corner of his mouth lifted, but his eyes stayed serious. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and the brush of his fingers against her temple sent a shiver down her arms that had nothing to do with the morning chill. She waited for it. The shift, the moment where he'd check his phone, mention a meeting, create distance with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 100 times. She waited for the choreography of departure, the polite smile, the vague suggestion to do this again, the door closing behind her with a click that meant goodbye. It didn't come. Instead, he said one word. "Stay." She looked at him. "Stay," he said again, like it cost him something, like the word had to climb over years of walls and rules and enforced solitude to reach the surface, and when it finally did, it came out quiet and bruised. She didn't answer with words. She moved closer, pressed her forehead against his chest, and felt his arm wrap around her, heavy, warm, pulling her in with a certainty that made her throat tighten. They stayed like that. Minutes passed, maybe more. The city woke up beyond the windows, and neither of them moved to join it. Eventually she borrowed one of his shirts, a grey one 3 sizes too large, that hung to her mid-thigh and smelled so much like him that wearing it felt intimate all over again. He made coffee. Real coffee, from the machine she still didn't understand, and he handed her a cup without asking how she took it. "Black with 1 sugar," he said. She stared at him. "I never told you that." "You didn't have to. You put 1 sugar in your tea at the gala." Same instinct. She held the cup with both hands and looked at him over the rim. This man, this impossible, controlled, emotionally fortified man, had been paying attention to how she sweetened her drinks. The thought hit her somewhere beneath the ribs and stayed there, warm and persistent. They moved to her apartment later that morning. She wanted to shower, change, feel the ground of her own space beneath her feet. He came with her, sat at her kitchen island, surrounded by her beautiful chaos, the mugs and the scattered mail and the orange sun pillow visible on the couch, and looked entirely at ease in a way that would have been unthinkable a month ago. She was in the bedroom when the knock came. Ethan didn't wait for an invitation. He never did. She heard the front door open, heard her brother's voice carry through the apartment with its usual authority. Door was unlocked. "You really need to stop doing that. Anyone could just—" He stopped. Jeremy was standing by the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, wearing yesterday's clothes with his sleeves rolled up. Ethan looked at him, then at the 2 coffee mugs, then at the bedroom hallway, where the sound of his sister's hairdryer hummed behind a closed door. "You must be the brother," Jeremy said, calm, measured. The mask was back in place. Ethan's jaw tightened. He was a lawyer. He assembled evidence quickly. "And you're the neighbor." Jeremy Blackburn. Ethan recognized the name. His posture changed, the slight straightening of a man recalculating the situation. "I know who you are." "Then you know I don't bite." "I also know your reputation." The air in the room thickened. Jeremy set down his coffee. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. 2 men, both built for confrontation, both choosing, for the moment, not to draw first. Brooke appeared from the hallway, towel around her shoulders, and froze when she saw the scene. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "Checking on you." His eyes moved between her and Jeremy. "Apparently I should check more often." "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything." He smiled, the tight, knowing smile of an older brother who'd just had every suspicion confirmed. "I'm just impressed, honestly. The 3-month bet is going better than I expected." The words left his mouth easily, almost playful. A brotherly jab, tossed without thought. The silence that followed was not playful. Jeremy's expression didn't change, not at first. The shift was subtle, a flicker behind his eyes like a light switching off. He looked at Brooke. She saw the question form on his face before he asked it. He didn't ask it. He didn't need to. Her face had already answered. The blood drained from her cheeks so fast she looked ghostly. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. And that silence, the absence of an immediate denial, the half-second of panic in her eyes, told him everything. The bet. 3 months. A game. He was a game. His jaw locked. Something behind his ribs went cold and hard, like wet concrete setting in an instant. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. She watched the walls rebuild themselves in real time, each one higher, thicker, more impenetrable than before. He set down the coffee cup, carefully, precisely, the way he did everything when he was trying not to break something. "Jeremy," she started. He walked past her, past Ethan, who had gone pale with the realization of what he'd done, past the orange pillow, past the scattered mugs, past everything that had felt like home 20 minutes ago. The door closed behind him without a sound. Somehow, that was worse than a slam. She called him 14 times that first night. Each call rang twice and went to voicemail. She typed messages she deleted, typed new ones, sent them. The blue check marks appeared within seconds, read every single one. And the silence that followed was louder than anything she'd ever heard. By the second day, she stopped calling. Not because the urgency faded, but because each rejected call felt like pressing a bruise just to confirm it was still there. She sat on her kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, with her back against the cabinet and her phone face down on the tile beside her. The apartment was dark. The mugs were still on the counter. The coffee he'd made that morning, and was it really just that morning, had gone cold in the cup she couldn't bring herself to wash. On the third day she went upstairs. The hallway to the penthouse was quiet in a way that felt permanent. She stood in front of his door and pressed her palm flat against it, as though she could feel him on the other side. She knocked. 3 times. Waited. Knocked again. Nothing. "Jeremy." Her voice was thin. "Please." The silence on the other side was absolute, not the silence of an empty apartment. The silence of someone standing very still, choosing not to move. She pressed her forehead against the door and closed her eyes. The cool surface of the wood smelled like the hallway. Clean, impersonal, nothing like him. She stayed there for 2 minutes. Then she turned and walked to the elevator with the careful, measured steps of someone trying very hard not to fall apart in a public space. Inside the penthouse, Jeremy stood at the kitchen counter with both hands gripping the edge of the marble. His knuckles were white. His jaw ached from clenching. He'd heard every knock, heard her voice. That voice, the one that used to make midnight feel like a place instead of a time, and the sound of it had pulled at something in his chest so hard he thought his ribs might crack. He didn't open the door. He couldn't, because opening it would mean looking at her, and looking at her would mean remembering how she'd felt in his arms that morning, and remembering that would mean confronting the fact that he, Jeremy Blackburn, who had never needed anyone, who had built an empire on the principle that vulnerability was waste, had been vulnerable. Completely, for the first time. And it had been a bet, 3 months, a game played over wine and laughter, and nights that he'd mistaken for something real. Every text, every touch, every moment she fell asleep on his shoulder, all of it filtered now through a lens that turned gold into rust. He didn't know how to separate what was genuine from what was strategy, and the not knowing was the part that destroyed him. He poured whiskey, drank it standing up, poured another. The week crawled. He reverted to his old patterns with a discipline that felt like punishment. Early mornings, the gym in his penthouse alone, meetings that lasted until evening, dinners eaten standing at his kitchen counter, clean, efficient, silent. He erased her from his routine the way he'd erased every woman before her, except this time the empty spaces she left behind had shape and weight and texture. Marcus noticed on day 3, "You look terrible." "I'm fine." "You're wearing the same shirt as yesterday." Jeremy looked down. Marcus was right. He hadn't noticed. "What happened?" Marcus asked. No joke this time. No prodding. Just a direct question from a man who recognized damage when he saw it. "It doesn't matter." "It clearly does." Jeremy looked at his partner across the conference table. Marcus had seen him negotiate with hostile boards, survive market crashes, rebuild after failures that would have ended other men. He'd never once seen Jeremy avoid eye contact. He was avoiding it now. "She had a bet," Jeremy said quietly. "With her brother. 3 months to make a man like me fall for her." Marcus was still for a moment, then he exhaled. "Did she tell you that?" "The brother did. By accident." "And what did she say?" "Nothing. She didn't deny it." "She didn't deny it, or she didn't have time to deny it before you walked out?" Jeremy's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Marcus leaned forward. "I watched you change over the past month, not in ways you'd notice from the outside, but I noticed. You laughed more. You checked your phone like a teenager. You left a dinner with the Hanover group early because she texted you about a burned casserole." He paused. "That woman didn't fake what she did to you. Nobody's that good. You don't know that. I know you, and I know that whatever she did, it worked because it was real. The bet might have been the match, but the fire was hers, and yours." Jeremy said nothing. He stared at the table. His fingers tapped once against the surface, a single involuntary movement like a crack in a dam. Marcus stood. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a grown man, and you're going to do whatever you want regardless. But I will say this. You've spent your whole life making sure no one could hurt you. And the one person who finally got close enough to try is downstairs right now, probably sitting on her kitchen floor in the dark, wishing you'd open a door." He left. Jeremy sat alone in the conference room. The city moved outside the windows, indifferent, relentless, full of people who had never built walls as high as his and therefore had no idea how cold it was on the other side. He thought about her forehead against the door. He thought about the word stay and how it had tasted in his mouth, unfamiliar, terrifying, true. He thought about the bet. And then, slowly, painfully, he thought about everything that came after it. The balcony, at the gala, the way she'd touched his face, the way her voice cracked when she said his name through the door. A bet could start something, but a bet couldn't make someone tremble when they kissed you. A bet couldn't make someone cry through wood and silence at 3 a.m. He knew that. He just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The rage came on the 7th night, not the quiet kind, the kind that climbs up from the stomach and fills the chest and makes the hands shake. Brooke had spent 6 days cycling through sadness, guilt, confusion, and a grief that felt absurd for something that had lasted barely 2 months. On the 7th night, lying in bed at 11 o'clock with mascara smudged under her eyes and his grey shirt still folded on the chair where she'd left it, because she couldn't wear it and couldn't throw it away, she got angry, not at Ethan, not at herself, at him. Because she knew, with every nerve, every memory, every bruise on her heart, that what they had was real. The conversations at 2 a.m. weren't strategy. The way he'd held her while she talked about her mother wasn't a tactic. The word stay hadn't come from a woman running a con. It had come from a man who had finally, against every instinct he possessed, let someone in. And now he was punishing her for it. Not because she'd lied, but because feeling something had scared him so badly that the bet gave him an excuse to run, a reason to rebuild the walls, a justification to return to the cold, controlled, untouchable version of himself that never risked anything and never lost. She sat up in bed. She was done waiting. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt different this time. Not desperate, not pleading. Her jaw was set, her eyes were dry. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a white top. The same white top from the first night, the one with the loose hem that showed a strip of skin. She hadn't chosen it on purpose. Or maybe she had. She wasn't sure anymore where instinct ended and intention began. She knocked on the door, not politely, with her fists. Hard enough that the sound echoed down the hallway like a demand. "Open the door, Jeremy." Silence. She hit it again, harder. "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. And I'm not leaving this hallway until you open this door, so you can either let me in or listen to me through 3 inches of wood. Your choice." 5 seconds passed. 10. She raised her fist to knock again, and the door swung open. He stood in the doorway in a dark t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in a week. His hair was uncombed. His jaw was shadowed with days of stubble. His eyes, those grey calculating eyes, were bloodshot and hard and burning with the kind of fury that only comes from pain. "What do you want?" he said. Flat. Cold. A voice stripped of everything she'd come to know. She walked past him into the apartment without being invited. He closed the door and turned to face her, arms crossed, every inch of his body radiating stay away. She didn't stay away. "You're a coward," she said. His eyes narrowed. "Careful." "No. I've been careful for a week. I've called you, I've knocked, I've stood in that hallway talking to a door. And now I'm done being careful." Her voice was shaking, not with weakness, with the effort of holding back everything that wanted to come out at once. "The bet was stupid. I know that. It started because my brother told me no serious man would ever fall for me, and I was hurt, and I wanted to prove him wrong. That's it. That's the whole story. And I was the proof. You were the beginning, but you stopped being that a long time ago." Her eyes were filling now against her will, and she hated it, hated that her body betrayed her in the moment she needed to be strongest. "I stopped thinking about the bet the night you told me about your father. I stopped keeping count of days the first time you touched my back in the gym. I forgot it existed the night you kissed my cheek at my door and walked away without asking for anything." He didn't move. His jaw was locked. A muscle in his cheek twitched. "You want to believe it was all a game because that's easier," she said, stepping closer. "If it was a game, then you didn't really feel anything, and you can go back to your perfect empty apartment and your one-night rules and pretend that none of this mattered. One more step, close enough to see his pulse beating in his neck." "But it mattered." Her voice broke on the word. "It mattered, and you know it. And if you let me walk out that door right now because you're too proud to admit that someone got through to you, then you're not protecting yourself. You're just alone." The silence that followed was enormous. It filled the room. It pressed against the windows and the walls and the space between their bodies. He looked at her, at the tears running down her cheeks, at the white top, at the way her hands were trembling at her sides, even as her chin stayed lifted, defiant, unbroken. Something cracked behind his eyes. He moved. 2 steps. His hands found her waist the way they had in the kitchen, both hands firm, certain, and he pulled her into him. The kiss was not soft. It was desperate and raw, tasting of salt from her tears and fury from his, a collision of everything they'd held back and everything they'd been too afraid to say. She grabbed the front of his shirt. He lifted her off the ground. Her legs wrapped around his waist, and he carried her through the apartment, mouth never leaving hers, his arms locked beneath her like he was terrified she'd disappear if he loosened his grip. In the hallway, he pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes dropped to the white top, the hem riding up, the same strip of skin from the first night, and his voice came out rough and low and half-wrecked. "I love this top. I've loved it since the first time you showed up at my door. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she laughed, a broken, watery laugh that came out tangled with a sob. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "Then stop running." He carried her to the bedroom. What happened behind that door was not about proving anything. It was about 2 people who had spent weeks pretending they weren't drowning, finally letting go. He held her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid. She held him like a woman who had stopped being afraid of falling because she'd already fallen and the ground had turned out to be warm. Afterward, she lay against his chest. His hand moved slowly through her hair. The room was dark. The city glowed through the windows in streaks of amber and white. His voice came quiet, almost reluctant, like a man admitting something he'd fought against with everything he had. "I love you." She lifted her head, looked at him. His face was open in a way she'd never seen. No mask, no calculation, no armor. Just a man, afraid and honest and entirely hers. She kissed the corner of his mouth, then his jaw, then the scar near his eyebrow. "I know," she whispered. "I love you too." He pulled her closer, held her so tight she could feel his heartbeat against her own. For the first time in his life, Jeremy Blackburn fell asleep holding someone. He didn't let go once. The weeks that followed were not perfect. They were better than perfect. They were real. Jeremy did not become a different man overnight. He still folded his towels in thirds. He still lined up his shoes by the door. He still flinched sometimes when Brooke left a mug on his coffee table or kicked her sneakers into the middle of the hallway. But the flinch was followed now by something new. A breath. A choice. A letting go that felt less like losing control and more like gaining something he didn't have a word for yet. She taught him that silence didn't have to mean distance. He taught her that consistency wasn't the same as boredom. They fought, small, sharp arguments about things that didn't matter, like whether it was acceptable to eat cereal at 10 at night or whether the thermostat should ever go above 72. He argued with logic. She argued with volume. They both argued with stubbornness. And afterward, they'd sit on opposite ends of his couch in grumpy silence until one of them cracked, usually her, with a comment so absurd he'd exhale through his nose and the tension would dissolve like sugar in warm water. Ethan came to her apartment on a Tuesday evening. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and the posture of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say approximately 40 times on the drive over. "I was wrong," he said. Brooke leaned against the doorframe. "About which part?" "All of it. The bet. What I said about you. The idea that you were too much for someone." He swallowed. "You're not too much. You're exactly enough. And I should have told you that a long time ago instead of making you feel like you had to prove it." She looked at her brother, at the stiffness in his jaw that was trying so hard to be soft, at the redness around his eyes that said this wasn't easy for him, and felt the last hard knot in her chest come undone. She hugged him. He held on longer than he usually did. Marcus cornered Jeremy the following day at the office. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He walked into Jeremy's office, looked at him, really looked, the way only a 12-year friendship allows, and said 4 words. "I told you so." Jeremy almost smiled. "You're insufferable." "I'm right. There's a difference." Nina found out on a Thursday, when Brooke showed up to their morning session glowing in a way that had nothing to do with exercise and everything to do with the man who had kissed her goodbye at the elevator 10 minutes earlier. "It happened," Nina said. Not a question. It happened. Nina dropped the resistance band she was holding, grabbed Brooke by the shoulders and burst into tears so sudden and loud that the man on the treadmill across the gym nearly fell off. "I knew it," she said, half laughing, half sobbing, mascara already running. "I knew it from the first week, the way you talked about him and the way your whole face changed when you said his name. I knew." Brooke laughed. "You're making a scene." "I don't care. I've been waiting for this since you moved into this building." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Is he good to you?" "He's learning." "Is he trying?" Brooke thought about the morning she'd found fresh flowers on his kitchen counter, not arranged by a florist but bought by him, stems uneven, placed in a glass because he didn't own a vase. She thought about the night he'd fallen asleep on her couch, surrounded by her chaos, with one of her ridiculous throw pillows tucked under his arm. "He's trying," she said. Nina hugged her again, tighter this time, and whispered, close to her ear, "You deserve this. Every bit of it." Brooke closed her eyes and held on. For the first time in a very long time, she believed that. He planned it for 3 weeks. Jeremy Blackburn, a man who could restructure a billion-dollar company over a weekend, spent 21 days agonizing over flower arrangements. He chose peonies. Not because he knew anything about peonies, but because she'd mentioned them once. A passing comment during a walk. Something about her mother's garden when she was a girl. He'd stored it the way he stored everything about her. Quietly. Precisely. Without ever letting on. The penthouse was unrecognizable. Hundreds of candles lined the floor in clusters, their light turning the polished concrete into something warm and golden. The peonies were everywhere, on the kitchen counter, along the windowsills, gathered in the center of the dining table he never used. White and soft pink, their petals slightly open, filling the apartment with a scent so sweet it almost hurt. He'd done it himself. No florist, no assistant. His hands smelled like stems and wax, and there was a scratch on his thumb from a thorn he hadn't noticed. He stood in the middle of it and checked his watch. 7:58. His heart was pounding. He hated that. He also didn't want it to stop. At 8 o'clock she knocked. He opened the door and for a moment, just one, she didn't move. Her lips parted. Her eyes traveled past him into the apartment, taking in the glow, the flowers, the impossible softness of a space that used to feel like a showroom and now looked like a promise. "Jeremy," she breathed, "what is this?" He took her hand, led her inside. The candlelight flickered across her face, catching the shine in her eyes, and he thought, not for the first time but with more certainty than ever, that she was the most beautiful thing that had ever stood in any room he'd been in. He stopped in front of the window. The city stretched behind them, a million lights against the dark, but neither of them looked at it. "I had a life before you," he said. His voice was steady, but his hand, the one holding hers, was not. It was clean, controlled, everything in its place. "I thought that was enough." He paused. "It wasn't." She squeezed his fingers. "You came into my apartment with bare feet and burned dinners and 14 throw pillows, and you ruined everything I thought I wanted." The corner of his mouth lifted. "And I don't want to fix it. I don't want to go back to the quiet. I don't want a single morning where I wake up and you're not there." He reached into his pocket. The box was small, dark velvet. He opened it with one hand, the other still holding hers, and inside, a ring caught the candlelight and split it into tiny sparks. "You turned my life into a beautiful mess," he said, "and I want every single day of it." She was crying before he finished. Not the quiet kind, the kind that came with laughter and shaking hands and a smile so wide it barely fit on her face. "Yes," she said, before he could ask. "Yes, 1,000 times." He slid the ring onto her finger. His hands were trembling, hers were too, and when he kissed her, slow, deep, tasting of salt and joy, the city glittered behind them like it was applauding. Months later, the penthouse told a different story. Colourful throw pillows crowded the leather couch. 3 mugs sat on the coffee table, one with a lipstick stain. A pair of tiny knitted booties hung from the bookshelf beside his first edition business volumes, looking perfectly out of place. Brooke stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring something that was almost certainly about to burn. Her belly was round beneath an oversized sweater, and she was talking to herself again, narrating the recipe like a cooking show host who had lost the script. Jeremy came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, what was left of it, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "Something's burning," he murmured. "Everything's fine. It's smoking. That's flavor." He laughed, low, warm, pressed against her neck. She turned in his arms and kissed him, quick and soft, tasting like the sauce she'd been sampling. He looked at her, at the chaos around them, at the booties on the shelf and the mugs on the table, and the woman in his arms who had dismantled every wall he'd ever built and replaced them with something better. He smiled. The real one. Open, unguarded, fearless. The kind he only ever smiled for her. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.